Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the most magnificent faculties that we have as humans is this prefrontal cortex that allows us to visualize scenarios. And as developing beings back in the hunter-gatherer times, it was one of the things that made us most wildly successful, despite not being as big or strong or running as fast and all these other limitations. This prefrontal cortex is amazing. But when you put it with the rest of our hunter-gatherer biology, it can also really trip us up. It can give us PTSD or just the rumination where you go over something over and over and over again that is not a pleasant memory. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about why our brain does that to us, like what it's trying to accomplish, despite the fact that, it may seem like the most horrible thing ever. There's a meme that I found really entertaining about you're laying down to sleep, you're exhausted at the end of the day, and then your mind starts reminding you of every socially awkward encounter that you've had and things that are just goes on and on and on and thinking about this and obsessing about it. Meanwhile, what you know logically is probably everyone else involved has completely forgotten about it and moved on, but your mind wants to go over this again and again. Another example, I was minding my own business at a stoplight waiting to go to Costco, feeling completely mellow and chill, and my mind popped up a horrible memory from junior high, of feeling really awful. And on the surface, you're like, brain, what the hell? Why would you do this thing to me? So I'd love to share a little bit more about what the brain's trying for, even though it doesn't have that effect, and how to work with the cognitive part of it, because my guides have a lot of things to say on how to intervene with that. And I'd like to illuminate for you the energetic aspect of how to dismantle the energy of previous trauma, because there are these two aspects that end up working in tandem to keep us miserable about horrible things that happened to us before. And one of them is the cognitive pathways that get formed, the neurological pathways that fire over and over and over again. And the other part of it is the organized energy that's created by all the energy of trauma that's reinforced each time we think about the thing. So we want to dismantle the energetic memory or experience directly, and we want to coax our brain to decide that it doesn't need to keep trying to help us out by reminding us over and over and over again about the awful thing that happened to us a very long time ago. So starting with the shamanic side of things, the organized energy that gets created when we go through trauma, I find it really interesting to add in all my experiences in helping people to heal past life trauma to understand the mechanism as it applies in this lifetime. So many of my clients are old souls and had a lot of past lives, and if this part doesn't really resonate for you, totally okay. You don't have to believe in past lives, but let's just take this as a reasonable metaphor for understanding part of the human condition, because I'm not attached to being right or correct about what's objectively true, but as a former engineer, I'm deeply invested in results. So the result that I'm trying to offer here is to give you more ability to release trauma and to have the factual memory of the thing that happened, and not the emotional response and not the trauma responses. And this could be really big. This could be like a full PTSD, in which case you probably want to get some additional support. It's really good to have facilitated work, somatic experiencing, EMDR, NLP. These are some of the modalities that are magnificent and laser focused for working with this. But for a lot of us, it really doesn't get to the point of PTSD. It's just this leak where we're taking a peaceful shower or minding our own business, and we start remembering horrible moments throughout our life. And it's a leak of our joy and our gratitude and our wonder at the present experience. And it takes away from our resourcefulness to create a life that we want. And it undermines our self-trust and our trust in other people. You know, we could have 1,000 interactions that are really positive with people, but our minds, because they're scanning for threat, are biased to remember the one time somebody was weird and mean. And this is just kind of the unsupervised mind. And so one of the things I like to say about all of this work is developing the tools to be able to provide your thinking with some adult supervision and redirect it in a way that is more on the side of your happiness and well-being and health is a really great set of tools to have. So we're going to take a piece of that and work with it today in this work. So after that rather long setup, going back to the past lives that retain organized energy. We're not talking about the memory of your past lives in the Akashic records. We're talking about the things that when you have a trauma, suddenly that trauma is so much bigger. And it's because there was something unhealed in another lifetime, plus the legitimate awful suckiness of what happened in this lifetime. So people who are really charged around betrayal, for example, might have experienced an earlier betrayal. And unfortunately, this is also really common with sexual trauma. There's a lot of victims of sexual trauma in this lifetime. Not all, but many also have past life wounds that get activated, so they get a double dose of awfulness. And that's where shamanism is really effective in us not having to process through all the emotions and all the trauma and all the pain to be free of it. But we can go back in this really laser-focused way and dismantle the energy. And I'm going to give you the tool to do this. I'll tell you the whys and the how-fors, but I want to give you the tool. If you go to my website, handsoverheart.com, and you go to the resources tab and down to the articles page, there's a fire ceremony on the articles page, and you can put the energy of these past events from this lifetime or other lifetimes into the fire, and it will do this take a part of the energy that I'm going to talk about. It's incredibly effective for that. And so you may have to do more than one. It may be one and done. It may be 5 and done. And at most, it might be a 21-day cycle if it's a really big thing with a lot of past history. But that is a complete shamanic tool. It's not any fire ceremony. You really have to use the fire ceremony technique that I offer. So there's a video there. But it will give you the ability to take these little vignettes of old bad things that happened and neutralize them, dismantle the energy. And it'll go to work on the cognitive part too, the neural pathways that have formed around reminding you. So it does double duty. It's going to help with both the cognitive aspect of it, and it's going to help with the direct energetic intervention of taking these traumas apart. So out of thousands upon thousands of shamanic journeys on behalf of others, the places that past life pain seems to linger is when there's an incomplete emotional cycle. So often there's something terrible that happened at the level of fact. There could be an illness, there could be an injury, there could be people dying, terrible, terrible things happen. And some of them are really painful for the body, and some of them are just traumatic for the heart and the spirit. But the common thread that seems to weave between all of these when there's something that's unresolved is that there was an emotional cycle that was incomplete. So if a bunch of people died in a pandemic or the bubonic plague, you probably wouldn't have had a lot of space to mourn this massive loss if you survived, because your whole world would be in take apart and you'd be trying to get all the goats milked, and you would be trying to figure out how to do all these different functions and how to work with the people who somehow managed to survive for a community that had this congruence of every member playing a role in everyone's survival, to suddenly a bunch of those members are missing, and you would have dropped into the lower parts of Maslow's pyramid of needs and sort of suck it up buttercup and got things done, which was good for survival, but you may not have ever resolved the grief. And so in this lifetime, you might get a big wave of grief. And the reason that this is useful to share in regards to trauma that's happened in this lifetime and clearing it is the mechanism is exactly the same. I go back to the original event and I just play through the most beautiful completion for that experience really, really fast, help the soul see that it's moved on so the soul fragment that's trapped in the past life can be released, and then I dissipate the energy, and then I come back to my client and I just extract that patterning out of their energy field, and voila, neutralize. They're not carrying that pain around anymore. And similarly, when we go through a really bad event, an awful moment in junior high, an abusive experience, there's so much intense energy that happens with it that it takes on a life of its own. And you can think about this like if we were talking about a haunted house. A house might be haunted because there was a ghost there, because somebody didn't go on as they should have, and that's one problem to solve. But sometimes a house is haunted not because there's a soul that lingered there, but because really terrible, intense events took place. And the person who is sensitive could, at the low level, just feel really creepy and awful, and I just don't want to be in this hotel room. That can be one side of it. Or to the extreme, the very, very sensitive person who has a lot of ability to perceive energy through pictures could actually see a whole vignette playing out, a murder or a trauma. And the energy of the scene has been so intense that it could literally stay as a piece of organized energy in the room where it happened. So when we start talking about our own traumas, along our timeline, there can be these organized little snow globes of the vignettes of awful moments, because especially if there's abuse, there's all the heightened emotions of the perpetrator and the victim and the trauma, and a lot has happened with that. And then we often think about it because our fight or flight system is trying to figure out what went wrong, so we have a plan so that can never happen again. So we keep what would start to fade to shades of gray and lose coherence gets reactivated in Technicolor as our mind tries to remember and work through the scenario. So if you've ever had the experience of trying to go to therapy to have something get better and having it actually temporarily get worse, that can be some of the mechanism. By the way, huge fan of therapy, really, really great. Just know that with trauma, cognitive behavioral therapy is better for some other things. The modalities that I mentioned before are better for healing trauma, and it's just good to differentiate what's going on. So what we want to do is we want to go back and just dissipate the energy, just put it back into movement in the universe, no longer organized. So if you had a book and you threw it on the fire and it burned, it would be turned into ash. It would be transmuted. Not that I'm a fan of burning most books. I love books, but it gives you a visual picture of something that was organized energy, all these words, all this information that can be turned into just ash in the wind, where it's just back in the flow, becoming fertilizer for things, moving along. And that's what we want to do with the traumas that we've survived, is dissipate the energy. You'll still have the memory at the factual level. We're not trying to get rid of that. We're not trying to erase your Akashic records when we do past life healing. We're just trying not to have an anchor in middle world, which is the human realm in shamanic reality, with this little awful vignette playing out over and over again. Because it's something that we end up sort of dragging along on a cord, and when something activates it, we have a trauma response that's much, much bigger. So for most of the time, one of the ways of knowing that we maybe have some emotional debt around something, and that's another way to look at these unresolved things, because when we complete the cycle and release the energy, they're likely to dissipate on their own unless it was really, really huge. And the energy can just naturally, as former engineer, law of thermodynamics, hey, it just, entropy happens. This energy just dissipates naturally. So the bigger and more terrible the event, the more time entropy needs to work and the more you need to be disengaged. And that's why having these energetic interventions are really useful. So the fire ceremony is really magnificent for this. And one of the ways that you can notice is when you have a disproportional reaction to something, like what happened really wasn't okay with me, but it was like a 3 not okay, and I acted like it was a scale of 1 to 10, 7 reaction. good indication that I have some emotional debt around the thing. And there may be some old trauma, one of these old little vignettes that I want to clear and release. And again, the fire ceremony is really, really good for that. So moving on to the what the heck is my mind doing when it tries to help me by reminding me of awful moments of my life when I'm relaxed and chill and minding my own business. So in the natural course of events with the fight or flight system and this activation, again, early humans had this huge ability to use our frontal cortex and reason some stuff out. So when we almost step on a rattlesnake, we go back to camp that night and we tell the story, which, helps release the emotional energy. So we calm down. But then our mind's going to come back to it. It's going to remind us, remember that moment you almost stepped on a snake? Wow. And if you have an adrenaline reaction, it's telling your system that you still have something to work out. So in the normal course of events, you would almost step on a rattlesnake, get really freaked out, go back, tell the story. Other people in the tribe would probably advise you about their strategies that they've come up with for not stepping on rattlesnakes. And your mind would run through some scenarios. I'm particularly familiar with this because I was in Death Valley and I was bebopping along and we were looking into this old abandoned mine through this grade and it was really cool. And we turned around to leave and there was a rattlesnake within about 14, 16 inches of where we were standing. We'd walked right by it. We'd walked within like 3 or 4 inches of it. And it was completely chill. It was just sleeping. But as you can imagine, adrenaline response crept away far around it, didn't want to upset the rattlesnake. It was, again, super chill. Happily, we didn't step on it. But I realized, oh my goodness, I didn't have the situational awareness. And so in my mind, I ran a scenario where, like, when I'm out and about tromping in places where there's snakes, I need to be looking at the ground. I need to pay more attention. And then I practiced it. And now I can think about almost seeing that snake and I don't have a big adrenaline response. But what happens in the modern life is we don't get to complete the cycle. Like for something like that, the problems that hunter-gatherer people were dealing with, you could make a plan. You could plan not to stick your fingers into crevices where you couldn't see. You could plan to pay a little more attention. You could plan to make a little more noise when you walk. There are these strategies that allow us to be out and about and have rattlesnakes just not really be a big deal, even when they're out and about. They don't want to bite us. They can't eat us. They don't want to waste the venom. It's only if we just really frigging annoy them and they have to protect themselves that they become interested in biting us. And so you could run the scenario in your prefrontal cortex, make a plan, and then there'd be this relaxing, and then your mind would say, okay, I don't have to keep reminding you about snakes. Maybe it brings it up a time or two, and you're like, yeah, I got it. I have a plan. I'm remembering my be safe in the world strategy. And then the levels come down, and that's really great. But for a lot of trauma, like you were molested as a child, or your parents believed that beating their child with a belt was a really good idea, or these kind of complex social dynamics where suddenly you didn't have the cool genes and, your perfectly happy-go-lucky friends from 6th grade and 7th grade, turned into mean girls about how you were dressed. These are complicated things. You can't just create a scenario that allows you to have a really good plan that this could never happen. Oftentimes, ideally, trauma is a one-off, and it's a one-off with circumstances that are really different. And in fact, some of the hunter-gatherer strategies that we had to survive weren't so great, like stay in the cave unless you really have to go out, especially if you're in a female body. Like, that's not really a great life strategy for avoiding all the threats that are out there. But if you're ever in a time where you're like, I don't know if I want to leave if I don't have to, just have a little chat with your instincts, because they may be implementing an old hunter-gatherer strategy of stay home where you're safe. And the nice thing about the modern world is we really do have unprecedented levels of safety. So even as a trauma survivor, you've had thousands upon thousands more days where nothing bad happened to you than the days where they did. If you were experiencing extreme violence every single day, you probably wouldn't be here. So if you look out over 365 days of a year and you multiply that by 10 years, there you could be dealing with massive PTSD from 15 incidents in that time, but still proportionally most days nothing bad happened. And it's just a good perspective to remember that the human mind is bad at statistics. We're all about the dramatic events. So what we want to do when your mind thinks it's doing you a favor, oh, you're calm and relaxed, I'll remind you of something horrible. It's not trying to be mean. It's trying to gauge your adrenaline and cortisol response, because if you don't have a big one, it means it can offload keeping that memory close. And if you do have a big one, it means there's something unresolved. And when you shove it away, which is, the sort of default is, the mind goes, oh, okay, you're saying it's not a good time to run the frontal cortex is otherwise engaged. I can't get screen time to run this horrible scenario and have you come up with the solution like you would, like playing out the snake in your mind and how I would look at the ground. And then I would have seen it before we were quite so close to it. And it would have been a much better way to share space with a rattlesnake with, more personal space for both of us. The mind's like, okay, you can't give me the screen time of the frontal cortex. Cool. No problem. I'll come back and talk to you about it later. And that's the thing we don't want. We have the thing come up, we push it away, we have the reaction, and then the brain's like, okay, cool, I'll bring it up again. Or if you have something that's similarly traumatic, now is a great time to look at every time the bad thing has happened. And it's kind of a good thing. Like if you were foolishly almost stepping on a snake multiple times, having the reaction to not having solved the problem get bigger if you were that idiot child who, didn't feel deterred by burning your fingers. The aversion to it ideally goes up until you become willing to prioritize not burning your hand or stepping on a snake or whatever. So as you accumulate events and triggers that happen in the modern world, you get this much bigger response, because then there's sort of this override where the system's like, no, it's just too important to solve the problem. Sorry, can't take a memo and get back. We're going to freak out about this right now. So it's useful to understand this. And of course, your body and your mind aren't talking to you in words. They're talking to you in tensions and emotionality and chemistry like cortisol and adrenaline and how your breath speeds up. And there are all these interactions that are happening that aren't just your cognitive mind running the show. We're kind of naive about how much we think that the cognitive mind is driving the train as regards the human experience, but I digress. So the magical trick, if you're on your game, for when your mind tries to help you out in this misguided way by bringing up old trauma, is to immediately tune into it and take some slow, deep breaths. So if you're breathing slowly and deeply, then your mind remembers the scenario, but then it notes that you calm down, and then it thinks you've completed the cycle and it doesn't need to keep bringing it up. Now, again, if you have massive trauma, you probably need a little more facilitation. But for minor things like that awful moment in junior high that, it wasn't my favorite, but, it wasn't like it caused massive amounts of PTSD. This is a really good way. I take a few slow, deep breaths, and then my mind's like, oh, okay, this is resolved. Maybe it checks in about it a little later, takes some more slow, deep breaths, and then the mind lets go of it. It doesn't feel like it's helping you out by bringing it back so you can make a plan about it. It doesn't need to know that you have a good plan or a bad plan. It's just looking for a response where your levels don't activate. And so by practicing this, it's something that really dismantles the energy. And the cool thing is, like the fire ceremony that I talked about for these little energetic vignettes and the breathing slowly and deeply into your belly for the moment when you remember them, they're both going to work on both things, because these mechanisms create a feedback loop to increase trauma. But if you dismantle either one of them, the other is likely to follow. So you're getting work on both sides of this every time you do either of these interventions. But the trick is persistence. So the trick is being persistent about implementing these practices. So making time to do the fire ceremony proactively to clean out the old bad memory, or reminding yourself to do the breath work. And the trick for helping yourself remember to take slow, deep breaths with a bad memory instead of shoving it away and turning on the radio and distracting yourself as hard as possible is to celebrate when you remember that possibility. So when you notice that you're recapitulating something important, praise yourself. Good job. Yay me. I noticed. I rock. That's great. That's wonderful. Give yourself this reward because the brain is very trainable. So if you're like, yes, I did the most amazing thing. I noticed I was recapitulating an awful moment. That's awesome. And then you do the slow, deep breaths, you're going to have a lot more opportunity to remember that you have this tool. Your mind's going to be biased because it got a brain treat. Good job. Really, those rewards really actually do work. It sounds cheesy, but your awareness is much more likely to have you have awareness that you're recapitulating something so you can give the brain the positive thing that it wants when it's trying to help you never have that traumatic experience again. It's like, I need you to figure out what you can learn from this so that it never happens, and then you're calm again. And it doesn't have to be true. Like complex trauma, some of it's like, I was a kid. I'm not a kid anymore. Nobody's ever going to be able to do that to me again. But as an adult, our mind doesn't necessarily know that. So it's just trying to complete a cycle. And when we breathe slow, deep breaths and we relax the tension in our muscles and we say, yeah, that wasn't so great, but that's never going to happen again. I'm really resourceful. I know how to work with things, and whatever it is that's your process. And the cool thing about this is there's a little bit of research and development. So the more that you practice doing this for yourself, the more you're going to hone it and fine tune it and know the perfect thing to do, what words you want to say to yourself, how you come back to your sense of resourcefulness and self-trust and calm chemistry and interruption of the fight or flight response. All of this, you learn what works really well, and then you can have it literally be just a few breaths and a recentering to release an event, and it may never come up again. There are lots of things that I used to think about from junior high, and I have a little bit of trouble dredging up a bad junior high memory, and I know I really didn't enjoy that time of my life as it actually transpired. The neuroplasticity of our mind can work in amazing ways for us to release trauma, but it can get tripped up and have the opposite effect where it's a misguided attempt to keep us safe. Like we're trying to learn from our mistakes. It's just that so much of what's traumatic for human isn't our mistake. It's a unfortunate event or experience, and there just isn't a simple protocol for being an abused child like there is with how not to step on a rattlesnake in Southern California. It's a different kind of thing. And so that's where we don't have to figure it out. We don't have to recapitulate it. We don't have to make sense of it. People talk about forgiveness work. I'm more about neutrality. Like this person is irrelevant for me for the win. They don't come to mind. If they do come to mind, I don't have a chemistry response. Cool. I'm done with them. I don't have to worry about forgiving them. It's just the energy is neutralized. And that's how you know that you've completed this cycle is you can remember it and your mind is neutral. You don't have a tensing in the pit of your stomach. You don't have an activation. And you can even do this proactively. You don't have to wait until your mind reminds you of something terrible. Just don't overdo it. Don't try to do too many in one day. But you could write down a mildly bad experience because you want to have success with this. So please don't start with the worst one ever. Start with something that was, not so great. I really didn't love when. And then try this, remembering it and then just breathing through it and relaxing your muscles and coming out the other side. And then you may have to do that a couple of times. It's a practice thing. You're training your mind to work in a new way. So patience with, not getting instant results. You might play with fire ceremony. You might play with the breath work. You can proactively dismantle this, and then you can move on to bigger things. And again, I know I'm repeating myself on the subject, but for massive trauma, it really is best to have a facilitator, to have someone to work with. I do trauma release work. I do the shamanic version, so it may still be incomplete. You may do better with a soul retrieval with me and a somatic experiencing session with someone who's trained in that work. But just know that it's sort of a calibration issue. For a relatively healthy life, you can do this on your own. You have enormous ability to do it on your own. But for something that remembering it puts you into a panic attack, it would be mean to try to do this all on your own. So that's where the invitation is, to really find a way to get some qualified support so that you don't create a negative experience for yourself trying to release trauma, because often people, it's so negative when they go into it that they fight ever really getting it cleaned out. And I'm all about things being easeful and graceful. And sometimes it's just dark night of the soul. Sometimes we have these really tough moments where we're sitting with hard things, but I really believe on a healing path, even for extreme trauma, that should be the absolute minority, and the majority should be something soft and graceful and effortful in a way, like, you're retraining your mind, you're doing things cognitive, you're needing to be mindful and present. So there's engagement and there's effort involved with being present in a different way. But I don't believe that the healing process should re-traumatize. And I feel really, really strongly about that. So that's a discernment piece that you may want to implement when you're looking around for what modality you want to work with to seek ongoing healing and transformation. Because a lot of times we're not a hot mess. We're not in a terrible place. And yet we could be in such a better, brighter place if we are committed to just having our life get better. Like, we could be a really healthy person who's just becoming even healthier and even more in joy. And this work really frees up our energy for the present moment, which is part of what I love about that. So thank you so much for listening. And I hope that this work deeply supports you. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.